Did you know that 2/3 of ordinary people will harm an innocent stranger if someone in authority tells them to? That's not a statistic about criminals or psychopaths. That's data about your neighbors, your co-workers, maybe even you. You've probably wondered how decent people throughout history could participate in horrific acts. How did ordinary Germans become complicit in the Holocaust? How did college students transform into brutal prison guards in just days? The uncomfortable truth is that the line between good and evil isn't fixed in stone. It shifts like sand beneath our feet. What comes to mind when you hear about good people doing terrible things? Most of us want to believe that evil comes from inherently bad people, the rotten apples that spoil the bunch. We sleep better at night thinking monsters are born, not made. This comfortable belief crumbles when we examine the work of social psychologists like Philip Zimbardo, who spent decades studying how ordinary people become capable of extraordinary cruelty. Zimbardo's famous Stanford prison experiment revealed something deeply unsettling about human nature. Given the right circumstances, any of us can cross moral lines we never imagined we'd approach. The reality cuts deeper than individual character flaws. When systems create toxic environments, when authority figures demand obedience, when social roles reshape our identity, the person you thought you were can vanish faster than you'd ever expect. Understanding this isn't about excusing evil. It's about recognizing the invisible forces that can transform angels into devils, so we can better resist them. By the end of this exploration, you'll understand the psychological mechanisms that enable good people to commit evil acts, and more importantly, you'll learn how to build defenses against these forces in your own life. The stakes couldn't be higher, because recognizing these patterns might be the difference between standing up for what's right and becoming part of what's wrong. When evil happens, our instinct screams that bad people are to blame. This reflects what psychologists call the fundamental attribution error. We attribute behavior to personality rather than situation. Zimbardo puts it perfectly. We focus on the bad apples instead of examining the barrel that corrupted them. Consider the witch trials that terrorized Europe for centuries. The Malleus Maleficarum, or Hammer of Witches, painted a black and white world where evil came from inherently wicked people corrupted by the devil. This dispositional view justified torturing and murdering thousands of innocent people, all in the name of protecting society from inherent evil. The truth is far more disturbing. Evil doesn't require evil people. It requires evil systems. When we examine historical atrocities, we find that most perpetrators were ordinary citizens who gradually adapted to negative environments. They weren't born monsters. They became monsters through a process of systematic moral erosion. Think about your own workplace or social groups. How many times have you witnessed someone change their behavior completely based on their role or the surrounding pressures? The quiet accountant who becomes aggressive in meetings, the kind neighbor who turns cruel when discussing politics. These transformations happen because situations have power over our actions in ways we rarely acknowledge. This doesn't excuse evil behavior, but it reveals something crucial. If we want to prevent atrocities, we must focus on changing corrupt systems, not just punishing individuals. We must also understand that the potential for evil is inherent within all humans, and the difference between a good or evil person can be as simple as the situation they find themselves stuck in. The most dangerous phrase in human history might be, "I was just following orders," because it reveals how easily we surrender our moral agency to authority figures and toxic environments. Next, we will look at the slippery slope of moral disengagement. The truth is, good people don't wake up one day and decide to become evil. Instead, they slide down a gradual slope through a process psychologists call moral disengagement. Each small compromise makes the next one easier, until actions that once seemed unthinkable become justifiable. Zimbardo's research revealed several key mechanisms that enable this transformation. First, there's the foot-in-the-door technique. People who agree to small requests become more likely to comply with larger ones. In one study, homeowners who placed tiny "Drive safely" signs in their windows were 3 times more likely to later accept huge, ugly signs in their yards. In essence, people are more likely to comply when they are incrementally introduced to ideas or actions. This pattern appears everywhere, from corporate corruption to genocide. Nazi Germany didn't begin with death camps. It started with subtle propaganda, then social exclusion, then deportation, each step building on the previous one. By the time the final solution emerged, millions of people had already been conditioned to accept increasingly extreme measures towards their Jewish brothers and sisters. These were their neighbors and friends. The process works by gradually eroding our sense of personal responsibility. People learn to use euphemistic language that distances them from consequences, enhanced interrogation instead of torture, ethnic cleansing instead of genocide. They blame higher authorities, claiming they had no choice. They dehumanize victims, making them seem less worthy of moral consideration. A malicious seed is planted in their psyche that allows them to accept that the victims simply deserved it. Social models play a crucial role in this process. When we see others engaging in questionable behavior without consequences, we learn that such actions are acceptable. One corrupt police officer can contaminate an entire department. One dishonest manager can poison a company's culture. One prejudiced neighbor can shift an entire community's attitudes. The frightening part is how automatic this process becomes. People don't consciously choose to become evil. They gradually lose the ability to recognize evil in their own actions. They develop moral blind spots that grow larger over time, until behavior that would have horrified their past selves seems perfectly reasonable. But this is only the tip of the iceberg when it comes to human behavior and the transformation towards evil. In 1971, Zimbardo conducted an experiment that would forever change our understanding of human nature. He randomly assigned college students to play guards and prisoners in a mock prison experiment, attempting to understand institutional dynamics through controlled simulation. Instead, he witnessed a terrifying transformation that forced him to end the experiment after just 6 days. The students assigned to be guards quickly embraced their roles with disturbing enthusiasm. They created increasingly harsh punishments, stripped prisoners of dignity, and developed creative forms of psychological abuse. Meanwhile, the prisoners became passive, depressed, and psychologically disturbed. These were normal college students with no history of violence or mental illness. No different from your son or childhood friend. What made this transformation possible? The power of social roles to reshape identity. When we take on a role, whether guard or prisoner, teacher or student, manager or employee, we unconsciously absorb the expectations and behaviors associated with that position. The uniform makes the person as much as the person makes the uniform. This extends far beyond prison walls. Corporate executives who would never steal from a neighbor convince themselves that tax evasion is just smart business. Teachers who care deeply about children participate in systems that harm students' well-being. Soldiers who joined the military to protect their country commit atrocities against civilians without question. The key insight from Zimbardo's work is that ordinary people can become agents of terrible destruction simply by doing their jobs. They don't need special training in cruelty or any particular hatred for their victims. They just need a system that defines their role in ways that make harmful actions seem normal, necessary, or even virtuous. This explains why focusing on individual character often misses the point. When we ask, what kind of person could do such a thing? We're asking the wrong question. The right question is, what kind of situation could make an ordinary person do such a thing? Once we understand the situational factors that enable evil, we can begin to design systems that promote good instead. Next, we'll look at authority and obedience, encoded programs that affect all humans. Stanley Milgram's experiments on obedience revealed perhaps the most disturbing truth about human nature. Most people will harm innocent others when ordered to do so by an authority figure. In his famous studies, participants were told to deliver electric shocks to a learner who made mistakes. Despite hearing screams of pain, 2/3 of participants continued shocking the victim when the experimenter insisted they continue. These weren't sadistic individuals who enjoyed causing pain. They were ordinary people, teachers, engineers, postal workers, who struggled visibly with what they were doing. They sweated, they trembled, they even voiced opposition. But when the authority figure calmly stated, "The experiment requires that you continue," most people continued. Milgram identified several factors that bind people to obedience, even when it conflicts with their moral instincts. People feel obligated to honor their initial commitment to help with the experiment. They may also become so focused on the technical aspects of their task, adjusting voltage levels, following procedures, that they lose sight of the human consequences. They gradually transfer responsibility to the authority figure, seeing themselves as mere instruments rather than moral agents. This pattern repeats throughout history. The Holocaust wasn't carried out by monsters, but by bureaucrats who saw themselves as efficient administrators. Adolf Eichmann, one of the architects of the final solution, appeared in court not as a raving fanatic, but as a bland bureaucrat who simply followed the orders he was given, without question. Hannah Arendt called this the banality of evil, the way ordinary people can become complicit in extraordinary atrocities. The implications reach into every aspect of modern life. How many times have you done something at work that felt wrong because your boss insisted? How often do we comply with policies that harm people because that's just how things are done? When have you noticed something felt wrong, but still went and did it anyway? The same psychological mechanisms that enabled historical atrocities operate in smaller ways throughout our daily lives. Understanding obedience isn't about eliminating all authority. Civilization requires some level of structured cooperation. Instead, it's about developing the ability to distinguish between legitimate authority that serves genuine purposes and illegitimate authority that serves only power. It's about maintaining our sense of personal responsibility even when operating within hierarchical systems, and to resist living on autopilot. With that said, Let us turn to the final piece of the puzzle that allows evil to take hold within ordinary people: systems of power. While individuals commit evil acts, systems create the conditions that make such acts possible. Zimbardo's analysis goes beyond bad apples and bad barrels to examine the barrel makers, the systems of power that design toxic environments, and then deflect blame onto individuals when things go wrong. Systems create hierarchies where those at the top make decisions that ripple down to affect countless lives below. These decision-makers often remain physically and psychologically distant from the consequences of their choices. A corporate executive who cuts safety measures never sees the workers who get injured. A military commander who orders routine bombing raids never witnesses the civilian casualties. This administrative distance enables what Zimbardo calls bureaucratic evil, harm that results not from personal malice, but from systematic indifference to human consequences. People become numbers on spreadsheets, statistics in reports, abstractions that can be manipulated without moral consideration. Systems also use propaganda to shape how we perceive reality. They create hostile images of designated enemies, making them seem less than human and therefore legitimate targets for violence. Nazi propaganda portrayed Jews as vermin and inhuman. Corporate PR campaigns portray environmental protesters as extremists threatening jobs. Political movements paint opposing parties as existential threats to democracy. When systems want to justify harmful actions, they follow predictable patterns. They use euphemistic language to obscure reality and reprogram the subconscious of the collective. They claim moral necessity. We must do terrible things to prevent worse outcomes. Responsibility is distributed so widely that no individual feels accountable. A faulty promise is created that temporary measures will solve permanent problems. The most insidious aspect of system-level evil is how it makes participants feel virtuous. Corporate executives believe they're creating jobs and economic growth. Military personnel believe they're protecting freedom and democracy. Even concentration camp guards believed they were defending their nation against dangerous enemies. Systems don't just enable evil, they make evil feel righteous. More importantly, corrupt systems create division that underpin the age-old tale of us versus them. Understanding how good people turn bad means nothing if we can't apply these insights to protect ourselves and others from moral corruption. The research reveals specific strategies that can help us maintain our moral compass even in negative social environments. Let's take a look at a few of them. The first line of defense is recognizing when we're in situations that promote moral compromise. This requires what Philip Zimbardo calls situational sensitivity, the ability to notice environmental pressures that might influence our behavior in harmful ways. Start by identifying 3 situational factors affecting your decisions each day. Are you feeling pressured to conform to group expectations? Is authority being used to discourage questioning? Are you being asked to use language that distances you from the human impact of your actions? Simply naming these pressures reduces their power over you. Practice questioning authority sources before complying with requests. Ask yourself, who benefits from this action? What are the potential consequences for all parties involved? What would happen if I refused or suggested an alternative? These questions don't mean becoming defiant. They mean remaining thoughtful about when compliance serves genuine purposes versus when it serves only power. Create accountability systems with trusted friends or mentors who can provide external perspective on your decisions. Share your moral dilemmas with people who care about your character and will honestly challenge you when you're rationalizing questionable choices. Isolation makes moral compromise easier. Community makes it harder. The second strategy involves recognizing and countering the psychological mechanisms that enable moral disengagement. This requires constant vigilance against the subtle ways our minds justify harmful actions. Monitor your language use for euphemisms and abstractions that distance you from consequences. If you find yourself using technical jargon or bureaucratic terms to describe actions that affect people's lives, stop and translate your words into human terms. Instead of restructuring personnel resources, say, firing people. Instead of acceptable enemy losses, say, people will die. Maintain awareness of how your actions affect real individuals rather than abstract categories. When possible, learn the names and stories of people impacted by your decisions. Put faces on statistics. Visit the places where your choices have consequences. The more concrete and personal the impact becomes, the harder it is to rationalize harmful actions. Understand that those other people are not so different from you. Practice accepting personal responsibility for your choices, even when operating within systems that encourage diffusion of responsibility. Instead of saying, "I had no choice," or "I was just following orders," acknowledge your agency. "I chose to comply because the consequences of refusal seemed too high." This shift in language maintains your sense of moral ownership, even in constraining circumstances. The final strategy involves developing what Zimbardo calls heroic imagination, the ability to envision yourself acting courageously in moral crisis situations. Heroes aren't born with special character traits. They're ordinary people who prepare themselves mentally for moments when doing the right thing requires personal sacrifice. Engage in regular scenario visualization, where you imagine yourself facing moral dilemmas and rehearse ethical responses. What would you do if your boss asked you to lie to customers? How would you respond if colleagues made discriminatory jokes? How would you handle pressure to participate in harmful group activities? Mental rehearsal builds the cognitive pathways that enable moral courage when real situations arise. Clarify your core values through regular reflection and writing. Monthly, write out your fundamental moral principles and honestly assess how well your recent actions align with these values. When gaps appear between your stated beliefs and actual behavior, use this awareness to make corrections before compromises become habits. Build your capacity for moral courage through small acts of ethical leadership in low-stakes situations. Speak up when someone makes an offensive comment. Refuse to participate in gossip that harms others. Correct misinformation even when it's socially awkward. These small acts of integrity build what Zimbardo calls heroic muscle memory, the habit of choosing right over easy. The goal isn't to become a perfect moral agent, but to remain awake to the forces that can corrupt our judgment and erode our character. By understanding how good people turn bad, we can better ensure that we remain among the good, even when the world around us pressures us toward darkness. The line between good and evil may be permeable, but that doesn't mean we have to cross it. The research is clear. any of us can become capable of actions we currently find unthinkable. A good person can become a monster quicker than you think. This isn't a reason for despair. It's a call to vigilance. When we understand the psychological forces that transform ordinary people into agents of harm, we gain the power to resist those forces in our own lives. The next time you hear about someone doing terrible things, resist the urge to write them off as fundamentally different from you. Instead, ask what systems and situations enabled their transformation. Ask what you can do to create environments that bring out the best in people rather than the worst. Ask how you can build resistance to moral corruption in yourself and others. The capacity for both good and evil lives within each of us. The choice of which one we feed, moment by moment and day by day, determines not just our own character, but the character of the world we create together. Think on that, my friend, as it may be the choice that determines whether humanity evolves their own narrative or is crushed underneath the weight of their own dark side. Thank you for joining me on this exploration into the psychology of good versus evil. If this resonated, please share your reflections in the comments below and subscribe for more journeys into the depths of practical psychology and self-improvement. Until next time.